Netwürk Chatter. Hack the mainframe to discover what's happening in the Grimm dying universe.
Hello, Legionnaires! Welcome back to Netwürk Chatter, where we discuss what's happening in the Grimm dying universe. I'm Brian Colin, co-creator of Vast Grimm, Grimm Expanse, Plunderlust, and Sqwürmish. Today's episode will be brought to you in 3 segments. 1. Mechanic Panic. We're going to talk about Grimm infections, how, why, and how to manage. 2. Lore Explore, a closer look at Kid Arachnid. And 3. Just discovered, Sqwürmish PDFs. Yes, they are out in the wild. Let's go ahead and jump into the airlock. Okay, like I said, we are diving into Mechanic Panic with Grimm infections. Grimm infections can be an integral element to party interaction, and they affect the Legion's outlook on the universe as it gets closer to its inevitable demise. In the current rules, creatures have like a 1 in X, 1 in specific number chance of being infected with a Grimm parasite. People and creatures can live for a long time with the worms inside of them without actually becoming one of the Grimm. So, at any time that they're up close and personal in an encounter, players run the chance of their characters getting infected. Like if a PC is within melee range of an infected creature, that player has to make a toughness test with the DR12 each round just to avoid being infected. Now I'm changing it up a little bit in the next iteration where creatures no longer have like a 1 in X chance of being infected. Instead, the difficulty increases for certain creatures. Some less likely to be infected may have a GP 10 or Grimm Parasite of 10, where a creature that is certain to be crawling with worms may have a GP 18. Now, when the player rolls their toughness test, that will be what they need to beat, whatever their GP score is. As I mentioned in the last episode of Netwürk Chatter, if you haven't watched it, go back and click it, watch it. It's, maybe like 12 minutes. Wearing a rebreather greatly increases the PC's chance of getting infected. Increases. No, it greatly reduces the PC's chance of getting infected. There's a link in the show notes to my Patreon where you can score the rebreather rules for free. So, but what happens, say, if you do get infected, you ask? Well, if the narrative makes it so that the specific worm larva should be squirming its way into the body, then use that. Otherwise, roll a d6 or one of my worm infection pencils. I even made these fancy D6 pencils where players at the table can just roll the pencil and read what's on it and be like, let's see. Oh, I had it backwards. Ramathus, the parasite is in your heart, boom, 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 causing it to beat increasingly fast. So that way you can figure out what worm the player is infected by. And then generally, I like to let the players roll the worm. I think it's more fun, and it always seems to be that players get more excited where they're the ones determining their fate. And even though they've already rolled a toughness test to see if they've been infected, they should make a second roll. This will be standard DR12, and when they roll that on the D20 and add their toughness mod to it, if they succeed, the worm is working with them. They have a parasitic pleasure. That's right, the worm is thrilled to have a new host. Each worm has a table to roll on for parasitic pleasures and parasitic pains. If the player happens to fail their test, then they have a parasitic pain. For each of these worms, there is a chance that the PC could be overcome by the worm and turned into one of the Grimm. Now, I never let this happen on the player's first day with Grimm infection. I want it to fester a little bit. I want them to, maybe get a little comfortable with the worm inside of them. And I want it to get a little more life and fun out of the whole scenario. So if they roll that, just move it to the next parasitic pain in the list. If you want to be extra nice, you could allow them to have a parasitic pleasure automatically on day 1. This could give them a false sense of hope as well. Now that the PC is infected, the player must make a toughness test every day to see how the worm infection is treating their character. If they get a parasitic pain, they should never get the same pain twice and should re-roll the die. In a number of my games, players have explored ways to surgically remove the worms from PC's bodies. This has always turned into some truly memorable moments in those games. So I added worm extraction tools to Sqwürmish, the skirmish game set in the same Grimm dying universe, and they will be added using those same tools to the next iteration of the rules. Say a PC manages to remove a worm and become infection-free. Now that character can no longer be infected by that specific type of worm. It also makes them one step closer to becoming one of the unscathed. Now I'll dive into that in a future episode, but that really means that they've been infected by all 6 worms and can no longer be infected again. But you may ask, if they get infected again and roll the same worm, what happens? Well, that really depends on just how brutal you want your game to be. I'd suggest having them re-roll, so it's a different worm altogether. But if you want to be a little more gentle, you could describe how the worm larva tries to work its way through the character's tear duct, or only to be repulsed by propelling itself down the meatbag's body until it slinks to the ground. Now it's up to the player to keep track of all the worms they've been infected by. So that's a deep dive into worm infection. Let's go right on over to the Lore Explorer. And we've got Kid Arachnid. So, Kid Arachnid has not left his post of Tangle Station in over 40 years. He was brought to his forever home along with a dozen other child prodigies at a very young age. There, they were trained by the network's original architect to maintain the feed and continually grow its data streams. In his new home, Kid Arachnid excelled beyond all of his peers, quickly connecting more and more of the verse together. Watching the child weave the verse's information tapestry, the architect bestowed the Kid Arachnid name upon him the very first year. The other children, still only having numbers instead of names, talked amongst themselves, and they determined that Kid Arachnid had been hijacking their feeds, and their work they had done, claiming it as his own. The 12 banded together to make Kid Arachnid's life miserable. Over the next few years, the other children and Kid Arachnid played each other like a strategic game. Kid Arachnid mastered the art of posting believable, speculative information across the network, influencing wars and shifting cultures. And when the architect would discover false information was coming out of Tangle Station, there were always breadcrumbs leading back to one of the other kids. Retaliating, the children found ways to make Kid Arachnid feel even more isolated than he already was. And when one child was expelled from the station after falsely accused of seeding dissent across the network, the other youth piled on Kid Arachnid, beating him so badly that he went into a coma and one of his eyes was dislodged from the socket. While in the repair bay, the medbot had its orders scrambled and removed Kid Arachnid's tongue. The architect could never prove the other children were to blame for Kid Arachnid's beating, as the station's recording devices were malfunctioning that day. After recovering, Kid Arachnid spent the next decade focusing on a way to back up his memories and instilling his entire personality into a bot. When he finally achieved success, he backed up each of the remaining prodigies and embedded their memories into individual bots. These consciousnesses were designed to imprison them within the machines. There, they were aware of their surroundings and what was happening to them in real time, but unable to control the movements or actions in the shell they were in. Kid Arachnid programmed the bots to murder their predecessors, forcing the personalities trapped within to watch the demise of their meatbag selves. By this point, the architect was old and decrepit, barely leaving his quarters. He was unaware of what had transpired. Fast forward to today, Kid Arachnid controls the network all over the verse. He controls information. And there's more on Kid Arachnid in Space Cruisers on page 47. That's where I really first started to do a little bit of lore on him, but this newest lore is in this month's, or actually May's, Patreon, and that's the free file. So if you want to download that, you can get all that lore for free. It also has his basic stat block as well. And now we are going to dive into Just Discovered. As I mentioned at the top of the show, that these Sqwürmish PDFs are now out in the wild, and I'm thrilled that the rules are ready for initial consumption. The manuscript has been edited multiple times. There's been an initial pass on the fully designed version. And what does this mean, you ask? Well, for people who back the campaign, PDFs have been delivered. If you missed it and want to hop on the late pledge, you can do that now in GameFound. You can also pick up the PDFs on my Creature Curation website. If you're not familiar with Sqwürmish, it's a miniatures agnostic skirmish game set in the Grimm Expanse and is completely compatible with the RPG. The scenario book has 13 interconnected adventures in it that can be played solo, versus, or co-op, and even play up to 4 people. You could also easily take that and use those as seeds for adventures in the RPG itself. The player book is 40 pages, whereas both the rule book and the scenario book one are 48-page totals. So that's it for this show. Be sure to check out the show notes where I've got links to all the things I've talked about. Also, be sure to follow the upcoming Kickstarter for the Grim Solitude and Jaws of Madness. If you're into Discord, join the Discord, and I'm trying to get the forums active on the Creature Curation website, so be sure to join that. If there's anything that you would like me to discuss in Lore Explorer or Mechanic Panic, mention it here in the notes or in the comments, mention it on Discord or in the forums, and I will try to add it to my growing list of what I want to cover here in Netwürk Chatter. All right, thank you all for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the network.